methodological challenges of teaching African political science, teaching politics in Africa. I want you now to go to the heart of the matter and explain to our audience, please, Dr. Iseke, what do we mean when we talk about the need to decolonize African political science? What are really the stakes involved?
Well, thank you, Basel, and greetings to my fellow panelists, Zainab and Rania, and to our viewers and those listening. Zainab and Rania have expertly, laid out the pedagogical issues and those of research and methods around teaching political science in Africa, and I'll weigh in on the question of decolonizing the discipline as Basel has posed to me. But to start with the question Basel asked about the issues involved, I will try to give some context to this. So over 60 years of pre-colonial African university education has not produced, African epistemologies that inform, teaching and learning, at its higher institutions generally. So for example, the curriculum in post-colonial African university education is still reflective of the legacy of colonial education, which was hegemonic and disruptive to African cultural practices, indigenous epistemologies, and ways of doing. So ways of knowing and ways of doing. And we have seen this come out in the presentations that Zainab and Rania have given. And, even in the comment section, I was looking at the comments made by some of our colleagues and students here who complain about, the absence of consent that relates to Egypt or Morocco or wherever they may be, and this explains why Africa remains locked, outside the core of world affairs, given the relationship between knowledge creation and power, right? And language also becomes an issue here. So it becomes clearer when we examine the relationship between Western epistemology and the intended learning outcomes in colonial Africa, which, for example, produce and continue to produce job seekers instead of job creators, who, in my view, delude themselves as educated people or educated elites, as the case may be. So in his contribution to the discourse of decolonizing knowledge making or creation in Africa, Maringe raised three critical but often unanswered questions about decolonization or decolonizing knowledge in the African university, which will guide my discussion today. And these questions, not really questions per se, but they are issue points. So the first is that he says the imperatives behind is the one of the imperative behind knowledge production and transformation in post-colonial African universities. Why is this important? Then secondly, challenging why the knowledge production systems in research, curriculum design, teaching and learning, and the training of doctoral students have remained unchanged even many years after, so-called decolonization. And then third, how the prevailing Eurocentric knowledge production systems in Africa can be transformed to better serve the needs of universities in the era of decolonization. Okay, so these are questions that echo the more radical perspective of scholars such as Claude Ake, who explain the imperialistic and capitalist nature or character of Western scholarship on economic development in the third world, generally. In his book, Social Sciences as Imperialism, a Theory of Political Development, Ake in 1982 argued that Western social sciences and scholarship in developing countries in Africa was focused on amounts to imperialism in the sense that it forces on the developing countries, capitalist values, capitalist institutions, and the capitalist development that shape the learning outcomes in social science towards addressing questions of how to make the developing countries more like the West, and more importantly, it propagates, according to Ake, mystification and modes of thought and action, which inevitably serves the interests of capitalism and imperialism. So now Ake went on, a step further by pointing out the seeming imperialistic nature of social science in Africa in what he calls capitalist bias in Western social science. Okay, so Western epistemology and social sciences, as he argues, promotes capitalist values and ideologies through the socialization process, and that a social scientist who grows up in a capitalist society is likely to be indoctrinated with values that are supportive of the capitalist mode of production. So the mode of knowledge production and the mode of production become in sync. Now these values, he notes, has the propensity to influence the paradigms that a scholar uses, the concepts that a lecturer, a scholar employs in teaching in the classroom, and the way that he or she formulates his or her research, a problem. So therefore, by treating a Western society as being the highest form of civilization in the evolutionary process of development, Western social science tends to become conservative by deliberately ensuring the maintenance of the existing social order, in other words, the status quo as it is. And this is reflected in concrete terms in the nature of research that we undertake in Africa, also in the values that political sciences seek to maximize, in the concepts that are being taught, and in the unit of analysis that we employ when we do our research and when we analyze the findings of those research. So this is the context of knowledge creation in political science in most African universities today. And it is reflected also, it came out in research that I've done on the course content of selected universities in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Angola, in Mozambique, which found these three things. One, the political science that is taught in these universities is not relevant to the political realities of these states, their peoples, and the continent in general. And Zainab also confirmed this in her own country location in Morocco. And like I said before, I've seen commentaries on this particular finding that I found in Nigeria, South Africa, Angola, and Mozambique. Secondly, the epistemological standpoint and worldview from which political science in Africa is taught is Western-centric and driven by the teleologic thought of the European society as the ideal model and measure of a developed society. So this is the epistemological standpoint from which we have been teaching political science in Africa. And then the last point, and these 2 points led me to the conclusion that the exogenous nature of epistemology in African universities explain why our curricula are ineffective in explaining and resolving local African challenges. In the case of political science, the courses that are offered are not designed to address the fundamental causes of political instabilities of many African states, therefore making it impossible, at best difficult, to address the national question issues around equal citizenship and their implications for nation building, so for example. So let me give some practical thoughts on how we can help to decolonize. And this is not exhaustive. I'm not being deterministic, but just I'm offering based on the research that I've done. But the caveat, a caveat for me would be to, first of all, understand what we mean by decolonization. Okay, for me, it should, I would rather say what it should be. Okay, so decolonization should be beyond merely changing or Africanizing content. It needs to be more about making such content relevant to the political needs of Africa. So I know that we've talked about content and I've mentioned it, that the content of the courses that I looked at in all these 4 universities that I studied were not, I mean, the universities in these 4 countries were not reflective of the realities. But I am saying that when we talk about decolonizing the political science curricula, we must move beyond content to thinking about how to make such content relevant to our political needs and realities in Africa. So that, for me, would be what I call decolonization, right? Now, several attempts have been made to examine the relationship between knowledge creation, its relevance to development, and impact on African scholarship. So people like Lawrence Oba, for instance, have argued for a pan-African approach to knowledge production if Africa is to be, liberated from the shackles of the global metrics of power, as manifested in the perverse forms of knowledge production, economic theory and practice, and the political system. A Congolese professor in the United States, Takumbi Lumumba Kasongo, also has argued for higher education in Africa, especially the university system, to sustain its legitimacy and its curriculum, and to continue to promote its transformative mission within the existing world system. And for him, he said, for that to happen, it's decolonization must be socially and economically relevant. It must be politically progressive, philosophically open, creative, and inclusive, as well as culturally unifying. So these are the conditions that Lumumba Kasongo has set out in what he thinks decolonization of the political science curricula should be about. And I tend to agree with this view because it resonates with the Afrocentric approach that was espoused by Molefi Asante, which seeks in every situation the appropriate centrality, of the African person in the curricula and classroom, and wherein, everything else is viewed from the perspective of the African person. So what this means is that if people are actually the means and end of development, as we have been told by development experts and practitioners, then education at any level in Africa should be about the African people, as espoused by Asante. In the case of our discipline, it means that, as I've always done in forums on this subject, we must begin to ask the question of political science for who? The political science we teach, who is it for? Is it for Africans and Africa, or for Europe and the rest of the world? If it means for Africans and Africa, then the question of decolonizing and Africanizing political science must be, making knowledge relevant to the lived experience and realities of Africans and Africa as a whole. So let me quickly talk about 3 or 4 points in terms of practical steps.
The how question.
The how question. This is the meat of it, because we often like to talk about the what's and but the how is actually more important in this era. And I will just give a few steps, from studies that I've done. And for me, the first one, and it kind of answers some of the questions that Basel was asking Zainab earlier on, and even later Rania, that the first step for me is that the states in Africa needs to be decolonized and Africanized, okay? Because decolonizing, Africanizing, and even talking about digitalizing the curricula of political science, it cannot happen outside, the African or the states as it is in Africa. Universities are a macrocosm of the larger macrocosm of the state. So unless the state and society itself are transformed, both in purpose and character, it may be a mirage to expect universities to transform and decolonize in the way that they should and in the ways that we want them to. So one example to underscore this is the language of teaching, which Zainab also referenced and Rania also referred to. The university cannot decolonize, the language of teaching outside the state or the basic education system. So that's why I'm saying that for a starting point, to solve the problem holistically, the state in Africa needs to be decolonized in terms of what it stands for, what it means, and what its purpose is. That's one. Secondly, as ivory towers, universities and academics, political scientists like us, have agency, despite the fact that we live in state systems that are largely Eurocentric in their origin and purpose. We still have agency, to contribute to rethinking and redesigning the state in Africa, and in so doing, even our discipline as a whole. So, for example, political science lecturers or professors can leverage their individual agency, using academic freedom, no matter how limited it is for now, to begin including content in their political science courses that interrogates the colonial origins of state formation in the continent, their essence and the continued relevance of these so-called states in the light of post-colonial realities. That's one. In the short term, whether decolonizing the state, whether it's a short-term or long-term goal, whether this is taking place or not, African political scientists have agency to engage in decolonizing the discipline. And some of the ways that we can do this, apart from designing courses in state formation, interrogating state formation and state making and state building in the continent, political science faculty in African universities must start engaging in the scholarship of teaching and learning, to enable self-reflection and reflexivity on our teaching practices, with a view to redesign course content to make them more relevant to our societal and states political realities. We all have research agendas, we all have research niche areas that we focus on, but the scholarship of teaching and learning political science, which is exactly what this webinar is actually fostering, is very important. It's high time we begin to reflect on our teaching practice in terms of our methods, in terms of our content, in terms of our worldviews, and bringing all of those back into developing, relevant courses for that will make an impact in our political space in the continent. Also, we need to make the African person, the African student, the center of teaching and learning. So, political science. So, for example, if you say that political science should be relevant, the starting point, like I do in every of my class, is to tell my students when they come to class that, look, you have all come from different locations, from different economic backgrounds, rich and poor. You are all in this class right now. You are in the university, it's your first year in the university. You are coming with a lot of nonsense. Don't be scared. Feel free to express your nonsense. My job is to remove the none and to leave you with the sense. So you go home with the sense and I take home the none. And of course, I'll trash them on my way out of class. But the purpose of that is to tell the students that you are important. Whatever political experience you have, whatever experience of politics and political science you've had before coming to class is important in co-creating knowledge together as a group, right? So that is how we can make the student the center of teaching and learning and decolonizing, for relevance. The last point I will talk about is digitalizing our teaching methods. Okay, from my research, a discussion of the relevance of political science curricula also includes the use of teaching and research methods that make use of modern technology, especially in this era of digitalization. Our analysis of digital politics show that the mutually reinforcing impact of digitalization on the practice, research, and teaching of politics is still emerging, whether in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Mozambique, or in Angola. As digital politics is not covered in the curricula, even though it has the potential to revolutionize our politics, not only the conduct of politics, but also revolutionize, research, teaching, and learning of political science in the discipline. Let me stop here for now, and probably I will share more thoughts as we go. Thank you.
So much. Thank you.